Hi everyone, and welcome to my updated Tragoul Nova guide for Diablo 3 Season 29. This is, besides Tarasha Meteor, the strongest build in the game. Talking about raw power, it actually is the best build in the game, and it's also the build of choice for 4-man high Greater Rift pushing as a trash killer slot. It has insane AoE damage output with those Novas and lots of density scaling. So the way this build works in general is that you channel Siphon Blood and then you automatically cast Death Novas all around you. And you also have two Simulacrums doing the same, so that you have 3 Novas every time you trigger one. And those scale with the amount of targets nearby to insane amounts of damage. So if you have a large pack of enemies, you're gonna decimate it. But on the other hand, you are really weak on single targets. So this build is like the opposite of a boss killer. However, there are ways to do that in solo push that I'm gonna explain in more detail later. What you need to know is that this build has not really changed very much, and it remains at the top of the line basically, with being one of the only builds in the game that can actually achieve a Greater Rift 150 solo in Season 29. There is a Paragon cap in place, you can only assign up to 800 points, and this makes it so that almost no build will be able to reach those highest tiers, but this one can. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through the entire setup, how to build it, how to play it, the step priorities, the skills, and everything you need to know. So let's get into it. Here's my updated D3 planner. I also updated the macro guide for this build already, so you can go check that out if you want. And we have a few different variations here. So there's solo push, speeds, group trash killer, T16, etc. Realistically, the only two that really matter are the solo push and the group trash killer. It's not really a great speed farming build. It's not really a great T16 build. On a Necromancer, you do have other choices for that. For example, the Red Necro. Even though it just got a fresh nerf, it is a better version of this. Or there's also an LOD version of this Nova build. There's even an Inarius version of this Nova build that works almost exactly the same. And those are also, especially the LOD version, is a better choice for speed farming if you want to do something like that. In general, though, it's not really recommended because it is low single target damage. So I'm going to be focusing mainly on the solo push version, and then I'm going to explain differences to this group push version. So let's get into it. We have the Tragouls set. You have a huge damage multiplier for your life spending abilities, which is the Death Nova. It spends life with the right rune of Blood Nova. And you also have a bunch of extra utility here. We have Blood Rush and Siphon Blood with all runes. And you also don't spend any essence anymore in case you ever cast anything, but that's not really a thing for this build. And then you have up to 300% extra life on the 4-piece bonus. So effectively, this is almost the same as like a 75% damage reduction effect from other sets, and it makes you very tanky. This is a quite tanky setup. And on the other hand, it also doesn't require any cooldowns. It doesn't really stack cooldown reduction or anything like that, so it just works. However, you have this density scaling to be aware of. There are some very important damage multipliers here. So the main multiplier is the Blood type blade. That's the one that is responsible for this really high AoE and really low single target damage. You get 400% extra damage, stacking up to 25 times for each enemy around you. So in large packs, you have insane damage, and on single target, you have nothing. This is why. Then we have the Funerary pick. This one gives you a Siphon Blood effect, where you drain from 3 targets at a time, and then you deal more damage to those drained targets, and you have an even stronger effect against a single target if there's only one target you're draining from. However, it's not really enough to make up for this loss of the Blood type blade multiplier. So generally, this is kind of whatever. You can try to target, for example, an elite in a pack of this to get a bit more damage out on that, but it doesn't really matter much. What matters though is this Siphon Blood power shift effect, which is the poison rune here on Siphon Blood that gives you a stacking damage buff. So you get 200% extra damage from having that rune, and you get all the runes from Tragoul, and you have this 20% damage stack effect from the Funerary pick. Then there's the Iron Rose. The Iron Rose is another pretty massive damage multiplier, up to 500% when it stacks up. And like this, you deal tons of extra damage. So those are the stacks here on the bar. So if you look at the buff bar, we have the 300 here. This is the Tragoul extra HP. So you can reach like millions of HP with this build. And then you have this Iron Rose 10 stacks here. There's one thing to be aware of here. When you have a shield pylon and you don't actually take any damage, you may actually lose this buff and not deal any damage anymore. So in order to fix that, you can just cast your Blood Nova a few times while you have a shield pylon, and then you get your stacks up again. So be aware of that. Otherwise, it should basically always be up at 10 stacks because you take a bit of damage, and then it has a 60-second timer, so it's not very hard to keep up. There's 3 more important items in the setup. First, the Crispin Sentence. Every Necromancer build runs that. You get extra damage for crowd-controlled enemies. So you have the slow from the Path of Trap itself, and then you have like the doubled effect when you cast your Bone Armor Dislocation. So you can combine this with the Convention of Elements. This is the Convention of Elements playstyle. You have a 12-second cycle, and 4 seconds of those are physical, where you do your nukes. So whenever physical comes around, you try to have your pull ready. Then you press your Bone Armor Dislocation, you get the Crispin bonus, you get the Convention bonus, and then you start destroying everything. And then in between, you're gonna try to pull more enemies, go around, kite enemies, etc. And here's the Haunted Visions. This amulet is important because you get more Novas from your Simulacrums, and you want to make sure they're always up. So you need this amulet here to make them permanent. There's a few other smaller choices here, so you can also move this stuff around. But in Season 29 in particular, the Guardian set is really powerful because at those low Paragon values, this is very impactful, gives you nearly double damage, gives you more than double toughness. It is very good. Usually at higher Paragons you replace this, but it's not possible in Season 29. So you're gonna go Guardians all the way. And then we have Aquila and Mantle of Channeling. So this is just extra damage reduction. You don't really spend any resources, so this is always up. And Mantle of Channeling is also damage and damage reduction while you are channeling. This does work with the Siphon Blood. However, if you feel a bit too squishy, you can easily replace Mantle of Channeling for example, Dainty's Binding or even Stone Gauntlets. Stone Gauntlets are not really the most powerful on this build because you have Standalone and that stacks together additively. However, Stone Gauntlets is still powerful, but you need to have the Invigorating Gemstone, which is included in this setup here as well. It's either Dainty or Stone Gauntlets or Mantle of Channeling as like the last armor slot here basically. And that is the entire setup. Now, about the Invigorating Gemstone, you can use that just to feel more comfortable. So you are immune to stuns, knockback, frozen, etc. It's really useful when you make large pulls, you have many elite packs, and they can really mess you up. And Invigorating Gemstone just helps a ton. It also gives you more healing, so it's easier to survive those packs, and it might have other perks like enabling Stone Gauntlets. However, if you want to have more damage output on the higher end, you're gonna see people running Zay's Stone here, which is also the choice that people do in groups most of the time. So you have a bit more damage, even though this is mostly a melee playstyle. You have like this Nova around you, don't really get much benefit from Zay's. However, you can get between 16 and 32% extra damage. So it is something, and it can still allow you to squeeze out a bit more power. But for the most part, I do recommend Invigorating Gemstone. And then in a solo run, you go Bane of the Stricken. This is absolutely required to have any chance to kill the boss, because this build is extremely weak on the boss, and you need to stack this up for a while to actually have a chance to defeat it. And in group push, there can be another choice here, like the Bane of the Powerful, for example. Now for the remaining skill and passive setup, so we have the Blood Nova I mentioned, we have Siphon Blood. It doesn't matter which rune you choose, because this set gives everything. For the non-Tragoul variants, you have to choose the Power Shift rune here, so you can do that. You have the Simulacrum, Blood and Bone, so you get 2 of them. Blood Rush, similar to the Siphon Blood, it gets all the runes, so you get extra armor, you get 2 charges, it doesn't cost anything, it's pretty nice. Then we have a Curse. This is usually Frailty. So Frailty just allows you to like execute enemies at a certain low HP threshold. This is very useful in solo pushing, it's also useful in groups. If you can't survive at all, then you can change Frailty to either Leech or Decrepify. I would probably suggest Decrepify here with Tragouls, and then usually Leech with Venarius or LOD if you want to play those, because they need a bit more recovery. But generally this build is tanky enough that you shouldn't need that, and you can use Frailty. And then you have the Bone Armor that gives you extra damage reduction and the ability to stun for Crispin. And for the passives, the important one is Standalone, Swift Harvesting that gives you faster ticks on your Siphon Blood, and like this you get more ticks from the Iron Rose, which automatically triggers Novas as you cast Siphon Blood. And we have Spreading Malediction, so in large packs you get some extra damage there when you curse enemies. If you want to speed farm with this build, which I do not recommend, you can put in the Steward's Greaves in the cube here, so you can just like drop the Aquila for example, You can also wear the stewards and then keep the mantle or something like that. So you can like swap this around, but you want to have a bit of extra speed. However, it's not really that great. And the same goes for T16 as well. You don't really want to do that. However, there's also a manual cast version where you can like equip the Siphon of Cycle instead of the Funerary pick, and you don't have to keep up those stacks from the Siphon Blood, and instead you just walk around and right click your Nova all the time, and like this you can just like, you know, hit and run kind of with a Siphon of Cycle. So you can do that. However, it's still not really that great, honestly. So probably just play another build. And for your step priorities, you want to hit a certain attack speed breakpoint, which is 1.67 attacks per second. So you can usually achieve this with just a few rolls. Usually always have one either on the Crispin or Ring of Fire Grandeur, because both of these come with attack speed pre-rolled. And then maybe something like on the weapon, maybe on the glove, you can get a bit of attack speed. 1.67 gives you a really nice breakpoint. You don't really have more than that. You don't want to have much less, or you don't want to have any less than that. But if you get like, you know, 1.7 or a tiny bit more, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure that you have 1.67 attacks per second. And other than that, it's just, yeah, physical damage rolls, crit rolls, and you don't need any cooldown, you don't need any resources. So everything else is very easy. Just like get defense, get int, vitality, etc. so that you get the most out of this Guardian set. And maybe some movement speed on the boots. In Season 29 in particular, you can actually have movement speed there and from the Paragons. And Death Nova damage, of course. Speaking of Paragons, here's the setup. So in Season 29, you can assign 200 points into each of the categories, into each of the different like effects even. So the way to go usually is that you put as much attack speed as you need to hit that attack speed breakpoint, 1.67. And once you do that from only gear and from your enchanters, for example, or so, you just go for like mostly crit damage, a bit of crit chance. The best way to do this is to just like even out 1 to 10 crit chance and crit damage. So this is how we can know what is the best ratio to put here. It's usually mostly crit damage focused. Then on the defense, we have life and armor. You just want to try to like balance this out somewhere where it's like the most toughness. So that depends on exactly the level of gear and like what kind of stat distribution you have, but it's somewhere around here. And then 200% area damage. So this is really powerful for a build like this, where you try to make large pulls and then nuke them down. However, it's going to make the single target situation even worse. So when you go to the higher tiers, that's a problem. And then for speed variations, you can change this a little bit, but mostly I would just pick up a bit more globe radius or so, and that's about it. So the rest stays the same. And here we just have the movement speed, just helps you to go faster through the rifts, helps you to make those pulls. So I'll go for that. Now for the gameplay, it is pretty straightforward. You basically hold down the Siphon Blood button, try to prioritize those elite targets, because you get this extra damage effect against a few targets that you channel from. And then, as I described, you play around the Convention of Elements cycle. So after cold comes physical. Physical is the element of your skill, and this is when you do most of the damage. So you try to have all your stacks ready, you try to have a pull ready, and then you press, for example, your curse and then your bone armor. And with the bone armor stun, you get a higher Crispin damage effect. Make sure that your sims are always up. Usually they are not really in danger of dying or anything like that, but it may happen that they die, especially when there's like grotesque elites or like these molten explosions or something like that. These large bursts of damage can sometimes kill your simulacrums, so be aware that that can happen, and you just want to kind of check on them sometimes, and worst case cast them again. And then comes the boss fight. So the boss fight in particular is a bit more tricky, but it is doable. So the way to do this is that you have to banish a stricken and you stack it up for a while, and you just go for like a minute or 2 or 3 minutes or so on the highest tiers. Just stack up stricken to deal more damage. You will still do nothing to the boss, as you can see here, even after like, you know, 100 or 200 stricken stacks, because it's a single target. So if it's a single target boss, the only way to do this is to have a pylon ready. So you can see me doing this here right now. I try to slowly kite the boss towards the pylon, let him TP on me, try to get stricken stacks on my way there. And then after I feel like I'm ready, I click the pylon with Nemesis Bracers on the follower. Like this, I get extra targets, I get an extra multiplier from the Blood type blade, and then the boss can actually die. Sometimes you have a good boss, you have like Hamelin or Zaxxers or so, where this is not really needed because you already get adds from the boss itself, but most of the time it's not really that reliable. And also, it's still better to just have more targets. So you just always save the pylons. Effectively, in a solo push, I would suggest to just never click any pylon that is not a counted pylon. Counted, of course, is really powerful. And then you basically guaranteed end up with a pylon somewhere where you can spawn the boss. And then you have the pylon and you see it now suddenly it goes much faster. It may depend a bit on the luck of what comes out of that pylon. So here, for example, you see there was only 3 targets extra, not really that much. But now there are illusions. And if you get an illusion pack, well, suddenly things look a bit different. And then you have way more damage and your Blood Blade can go crazy. So there's a bit of RNG involved, and you definitely need to save up some minutes to kill the boss. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower. That depends on the boss, that depends on the pylon, but it can be really fast as well. So if you look at this example here with a Scandial that actually spawns its own ads, and then we have like a decent pack from the pylon, and then we have a power pylon, and there's an Oculus ring, you can see those bosses actually start melting really fast, like 100 times faster than you would do in like a solo fight. So you always save those pylons besides the conduits, and then you're gonna have one for the boss, and you can actually win the run. Aside from this, some optimizations that you can do with your gameplay is that you can try to hold off with your frailty curse. So frailty is really good to execute elites, but you don't really wanna like kill all the trash earlier. So when you have like large packs like these, you try to just curse the elites or just don't curse anything until later, because, well, the more trash monsters you have, the more you can fuel your Blood Blade and your area damage onto the elites. So you just bring them low much faster by not finishing off the trash, and then only the elites are left with low HP, you cast the frailty curse, they pop, and you move on. So this can definitely help you to like speed up the push, and like is the optimal way to play this. However, it's not too bad if you like accidentally cast a curse here and there and you hit like too many targets. Just try to move on and like pull the elites along. Always try to have many targets around you for the Blood Blade multiplier. Only this way you can actually finish elites. There's no other way. Like even if they're standing there with like 20% HP and you think you're pretty close to the frailty execute, forget about it. Always add fresh monsters. If there's nothing else, you're gonna do no damage whatsoever. So you see this here basically between all of my physical convention cycles, I always try to move forward with the pull, try to add more targets to the pull, and then usually the small trash monsters disappear in like the first COE cycle anyway, the bigger ones maybe in 2 or 3 cycles, and like this you have to constantly refuel the fight with more monsters as you go through those rifts. So this is also why this build is a bit more like fishy in terms of greater rift pushing. You always have to get those big open maps where you have some density so that you can actually work with, so that you have some damage output. At least on the higher tiers, like after 130, 140 or so, that will definitely be a requirement. One other tip that I can give you is that at the start of a run, you want to hold off with casting simulacrums a little bit. You want to stack up this Tragoul buff first. So you see here, this is this extra life bonus. So you just kind of like slowly walk around, step around a little bit and try to get a buff up. It only takes a few seconds. However, this extra life bonus can be snapshot into your simulacrums. I mentioned earlier they can die, and if they have quadrupled alive, well, they die much less. So you may end up like running into the rift, casting simulacrums, and like 30 seconds later they're dead, and they have a 2 minutes cooldown, and well, you have to wait 1.5 minutes. So you don't want to have that happen, and instead, if you do this snapshot early on, they are much more likely to survive the entire run, and you should be fine. In groups, it's much easier to play this build because usually you have your supports doing a lot of the hard work for you. You're going to be much more tanky. You can just like focus on nuking at the right time, coordinating this with your team. For example, you have a support barbarian pulling enemies, then he's doing a ground stomp to stun them for your Crispin and pull them together for the area damage. So you don't really have to do that much besides just like, you know, walking with your team and then nuking at the right time. So it's a bit easier to do there. And in groups, in fact, people also play with the Cypher cycle. I mentioned that earlier for the speedruns. It is also possible for a push scenario, for groups at least. It's a bit more damage output. However, you have to be much more precise with the coordination with your team. You have to nuke only a few Novas, you know, every COE cycle or every few COE cycles, or else you can't really keep up all your buffs and all your damage multipliers. So on the more casual end, I still suggest the Siphoning Blood playstyle, but on the higher end, the Cypher Cycle playstyle. But there's not really too much difference between them. It's just the more coordination. And that's it for this guide. So hope you enjoyed this. I wish you good luck in Season 29 with the Necromancer. Tragoul Nova is as powerful and as fun as ever, I think. I'm going to be probably starting with this build myself. I'm going to try to race the world first. Greater Rift 150 solo on hardcore SSF. Let's see how that will go. And I wish you good luck in the season as well. Hope you liked this video, and see you guys next time.